Gretchen Harrington. A young girl vanished without a trace after attending her Sunday school class. Despite extensive efforts by police and hundreds of volunteers, she was never found. The case remained a haunting mystery for 48 years, until a surprising turn of events finally brought the shocking truth to light. Gretchen Harrington was born on June 13, 1967, in Pennsylvania. She was the youngest of 3 daughters. Shortly after her birth, the family relocated to the quiet town of Brummel. Her father, a pastor, took up a position at the local church. Gretchen quickly grew fond of the town, spending countless hours outdoors with her sisters and neighborhood friends. Brummel was considered a safe and peaceful place, where parents felt comfortable allowing their children to play outside until nightfall. With its lush surroundings and tight-knit community, the town felt like a true paradise for children. Growing up in a deeply religious household, Gretchen spent much of her time at her father's church. She also stood out at Sunday school, consistently earning top marks. On the morning of August 15, 1975, 8-year-old Gretchen's family was excitedly awaiting the return of her mother and newborn sister from the hospital. Although she wanted to be there to welcome them, her father urged her not to miss Sunday school so she could maintain her excellent record. Though hesitant, Gretchen agreed. She grabbed her Bible and set off for church. Normally, she would have walked with her older sisters, but both of them stayed home that morning. Still, Gretchen wasn't worried. The church was less than a mile away, just about an 8-minute walk from their home. That day's Sunday school was divided into 2 sessions. The Sunday school day began with the children gathering at Trinity Church. After about an hour and a half, some of them made their way to the second church, where Gretchen's father served as pastor. But at 11:30 a.m., when the children arrived, he noticed that Gretchen was missing from the group. This struck him as odd, since the kids were usually escorted together. Assuming she might have remained at Trinity Church, he placed a call there. The call was answered by the wife of Pastor David, who taught at the Sunday school. She informed him that Gretchen wasn't there and relayed the concern to her husband. David was puzzled. Gretchen hadn't shown up for class at all that morning. Alarmed, her father began to fear something was seriously wrong. He asked David to notify the police and immediately started searching. Driving along the path between the 2 churches and checking nearby streets, he found no sign of Gretchen. He also contacted the parents of Gretchen's friends, hoping she might have gone to visit one of them. Before I continue, I want to remind you that only a small percentage of people who watch my videos are actually subscribed. So if you enjoy my content, consider subscribing. It's free and you can always change your mind later. Now let's move on with the video. But all of them were either at home or attending church, and no one had seen her. Even Gretchen's best friend, David's daughter, hadn't encountered her that day. With growing concern, the police launched an immediate search. As word of her disappearance spread through the community, hundreds of volunteers quickly stepped in to help. Nearly everyone in town knew Gretchen's father. As he was the pastor of a local church many residents attended, and they were eager to assist in any way they could. Alongside law enforcement, volunteers scoured the town, then expanded the search to nearby wooded areas and along the riverbank. A police helicopter joined the effort, surveying from above. The search continued late into the night, but brought no answers. The following day, even more people joined in. Police distributed flyers featuring Gretchen's photo and details about her disappearance, posting them along roads and handing them out to drivers passing through the area. Despite the extensive efforts, police not only failed to locate Gretchen, they were also unable to uncover any clues about what had happened to her. After days of searching, investigators had no leads, and her fate remained a complete mystery. The disappearance left the tight-knit community in shock. Residents had always felt safe letting their children play freely around town. Incidents like this were unheard of. Kids often spent hours exploring the woods or swimming in the river, all without constant adult supervision, and parents had never been concerned. But those carefree days were now over. The uncertainty surrounding Gretchen's fate only deepened the community's sense of fear. Speculation began to spread. Some thought she might have run away, while others feared she may have drowned in the river. But the most chilling theory of all was the possibility that someone had abducted her. Parents quickly stopped allowing their children to go out alone. One woman even cut her daughter's long hair to make her look like a boy, hoping it would keep her safer. A town that had once been peaceful and secure was suddenly gripped by fear and uncertainty. Police began questioning anyone who might have had even the slightest connection to Gretchen's disappearance. These interviews led to several potentially valuable leads. One witness claimed to have seen a girl who looked like Gretchen near the church on the morning she went missing. A green station wagon had pulled up beside her, though the witness didn't see what happened after that. Another individual shared a similar account, but this time it involved a white Cadillac. Investigators pursued both tips, tracking down the owners of every vehicle in the area that matched those descriptions, but none could be tied to the case. Then, for days after Gretchen vanished, detectives received a fresh lead. A resident of Westchester, located 30 minutes away from Brummel, called the police and said that he had found children's shorts matching the description of Gretchen's clothing. Investigators immediately showed them to Gretchen's mother, but she said they didn't belong to her daughter. From then on, there was no progress in the case for several weeks. The police called off the search operation and focused on the investigation. They continued interviewing people, following up on any available leads, but with each passing day, their hope of finding Gretchen alive diminished. This continued for 2 months until October 14th, when a chilling call came in to the police. A man went for a jog in a large national park about a 20-minute drive from Brummel. There, he noticed something strange in the bushes. At first, he didn't realize what it was, but when he came closer, he suddenly realized it was a human body. He immediately ran to the park rangers to inform them of the discovery, and they called the police. Officers quickly realized the remains were those of a child, but due to the extent of decomposition, identifying the child was extremely challenging. Detectives assumed it might be Gretchen, so they showed her parents photos of the clothing, which had been left carefully folded next to the remains. Gretchen's mother immediately confirmed they belonged to her daughter because she had made those clothes herself. Soon, forensic experts confirmed it was indeed Gretchen by matching the remains with her dental records. They also determined that the cause of death was multiple severe blows to the head, and the case was reclassified as a homicide. Due to the level of decomposition, they couldn't determine any other details, including whether the victim had been sexually assaulted. Moreover, DNA analysis didn't exist in 1975, so investigators were once again left without any clues. News of the murder reignited the attention of the local community, and the police began receiving even more tips. People realized that a dangerous criminal could still be somewhere among them, so everyone wanted to see the perpetrator brought to justice as soon as possible. Investigators received dozens of tips about suspicious men spotted in the park area where Gretchen's body was found, but all these tips led to dead ends. They also checked everyone living within a few-mile radius who had a history of violent crimes, but this yielded no results either. Several months after the discovery of the body, the case completely stalled, and there were no developments since then. Over the following years, the investigation was reopened from time to time. Detectives reviewed all available tips and leads, but each time it ended nowhere. The main problem was that detectives had no evidence at all. Even when the police began using DNA analysis, it didn't help in this particular case because no foreign samples were found on Gretchen's remains or her clothing. As a result, the case remained unsolved for many decades. It was occasionally mentioned in newspapers and featured on TV, but only in recent years did Gretchen's murder once again reignite wide public attention. 2 journalists, Joanna and Mike, decided to write a book about the crime. They worked on it for several years, gathering all available information piece by piece and trying to uncover new facts. Both journalists grew up in Brummel and were roughly the same age as Gretchen at the time of her murder. Joanna, who was only 9 at the time, remembered it pretty well because it not only impacted her life, but also the entire town. After Gretchen's disappearance, children could no longer roam the streets or leave home. Children could no longer roam the streets or leave home unsupervised. They all feared that the perpetrator might strike again, and this fear haunted them for many years. Even young children couldn't help but feel how their lives had suddenly changed, so they all felt that the perpetrator was. Children couldn't help but feel how their lives had suddenly changed, so they all remembered Gretchen's murder throughout the years. To write the book, Joanna and Mike secured access to the case documents and spoke with many individuals involved in the case. They carefully pieced together the events of those days, detailing the entire story. This book was released in 2022 and immediately attracted significant attention to the case. However, Its major impact came months later when a woman contacted the police to discuss Gretchen's case. She met with the leading detective to tell her story. The woman said that she was 10 years old at the time of the murder and lived in Havertone, just a short distance from Gretchen's home. She was friends with Gretchen and her older sisters, as well as numerous other kids in the area. She often slept over at her friends' houses. And one night, something horrifying happened. While she was staying at the house of two sisters, she woke up in the middle of the night to someone touching her. When she opened her eyes, she saw their father in front of her, who quickly left the room. She was afraid to tell anyone about it, and stayed in this house for another night. The same thing happened again. Her friend's father entered the bedroom and started touching her. The following morning, she finally told one of the sisters what had happened. To her surprise, she answered that it happened quite frequently. The girl also said that her father sometimes came to her sister at night. When she returned home, she told her parents everything. However, instead of going to the police, they simply prohibited her from visiting her friend's house anymore. And all of this happened just a week before Gretchen's disappearance. After telling her story, the woman finally disclosed the name of this man. It was David Zandstra, the same pastor who taught at the Sunday school. But that wasn't the end of her story. She also revealed that a month after Gretchen's disappearance, one of her friends was twice approached by a man who attempted to abduct her. The girl refused to get into his car and later told her friends that it was Zandstra who tried to lure her somewhere. To corroborate her statement, the woman showed detectives her personal diary from that time. On September 15, 1975, she wrote about her friend's plea to keep it a secret, fearing that David Zandstra might harm her. After receiving this information, the police immediately reopened the investigation. Upon reviewing the case materials, detectives uncovered several suspicious facts that indirectly implicated David. As we remember, it was he who reported Gretchen's disappearance to the police. The pastor provided investigators with a detailed description of her clothing: dark blue zip-up shorts with front studs and pockets without zippers or buttons. He also mentioned that she wore a white top with her hair in braids. At the same time, he claimed not to have seen Gretchen that day. This raised a reasonable question. How could he know what clothes she wore that morning? Especially since, after her body was found, David's descriptions were confirmed, she was wearing those exact clothes. The detectives also learned that the Sunday school classes started about 50 minutes late because Zandstra didn't show up at the church at the usual time. It meant that he would have had enough time to abduct Gretchen, murder her, dispose of her body in the park, and return to the church to begin his lessons. According to David's testimony, which he provided right after Gretchen's disappearance, he drove some of the children in his van to her father's church after the Sunday school classes. He insisted he didn't see Gretchen that morning and only noticed her absence when her father brought it to his attention. Another intriguing fact was that David, along with his wife and 3 children, moved to another state just a few months after the disappearance. The pastor also owned several vehicles, one of which was a green station wagon. As we recall, a witness told the police they saw a similar vehicle approaching a girl near the church on the day Gretchen disappeared. Piecing together all this information, the detectives decided to speak with the man. At that time, he was 83 years old and lived in Georgia, so they drove there. On July 17, 2023, they met with him at the police station and began questioning him. When Zandstra realized the detectives suspected him of murder, he began to deny everything, asking them what exactly they got against him. They told him they had the testimony of a woman he had touched during a sleepover at his house, as well as a story about him molesting his own daughters. Upon hearing this, David was stunned, and pretty soon his demeanor changed completely. Understanding that his dirty secrets were exposed, he stopped denying, and 48 years after the murder, he began to speak. According to his account, that morning he drove to Gretchen's father's church in his green American motor station wagon and saw the girl leaving her house. Waiting until there were no witnesses around, he approached her and offered her a ride. Without any hesitation, Gretchen got into his car. She knew David well because their families were friends, and she was also on her way to his Sunday school classes. But instead of taking her to the church, he drove her to a deserted park area, stopped the car, and told her to undress. Gretchen refused and said she wanted to go home, so Zandstra struck her several times on the head, causing her to lose consciousness. The pastor removed her clothes, satisfied himself, and then drove her to another park. Unable to find a pulse on her, he carried her body into the bushes and covered it with branches. After that, David drove back to the church to start his classes. Upon hearing his confession, the police arrested Zandstra for Gretchen's murder and extradited him to Pennsylvania. He was placed in jail awaiting trial. But for the police, this was just the beginning of a much deeper investigation. Considering that Zandstra had assaulted at least several girls, detectives strongly believed that there were likely other victims. The situation was worsened by the fact that the man worked as a pastor in many different cities and states for decades, so he could have committed numerous other crimes. Most of the time, he worked with children, and he was deeply respected in society, which could have allowed him to avoid any suspicions. But now, when the truth finally came out, detectives took his DNA sample and began searching for matches in other unsolved cases. They also looked into unsolved disappearances of girls in the cities where David had been working. Unfortunately, it didn't take long to find the first possible connection. Investigators soon connected Gretchen's case to another disturbing disappearance, that of 4-year-old Amanda Campbell, who went missing in California in 1991. Like Gretchen, Amanda had stepped outside her home in a quiet neighborhood and then vanished without a trace. At the time, David Zandstra was serving as a pastor in that very neighborhood. While there is currently no concrete evidence linking him to Amanda's case, police note the chilling similarities between the two incidents and believe he could be involved. Authorities are also looking into his potential connection to other crimes. Since this is an active and ongoing investigation, more information is likely to emerge in the coming months. As for the trial concerning Gretchen's murder, proceedings have not yet begun. There's a possibility that David's legal team may try to delay the trial or even advise him to withdraw his confession. If that happens, the case could stretch on for years, and there's no certainty he'll live long enough to hear the final judgment. Moving on to the next case. Michelle Long. Australia is a continent renowned for its stunning natural landscapes, including sandy beaches, vast deserts, and areas of bushland. Despite its wild beauty, it is also one of the most urbanized nations, home to major cities like Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane, and Perth. Snapper Point, a protected area near Fraser Park Beach and close to Catherine Hill Bay in New South Wales, is a notable spot. Its dramatic cliffs, composed entirely of jagged volcanic rock, draw adventurous visitors seeking remarkable photographs. On April 24, 2016, at approximately 10:30 a.m., a group of hikers at the base of the promontory spotted a large object floating on the water's surface. They alerted the authorities, who soon arrived and retrieved the item. On inspection, police discovered the body of an unidentified woman who had sustained multiple injuries, suggesting a violent assault. Though her identity remained unknown, media reports described her as an Asian woman, aged between 20 and 35, and of average height. 5 years earlier, in the northern Sichuan province of China, 20-year-old Meng Miling departed from a major airport amidst a heavy downpour. With tears in her eyes, she bid an emotional farewell to her beloved mother. Since the death of her father in February 2008, her mother had become the most important person in her life. Meng Miling was heading to Australia, a distant land she had dreamed of studying in since childhood. After an 11-hour flight, she arrived in Sydney. It was the first time Meng had traveled such a long distance on her own, but her determination to pursue her goals helped her face the journey without hesitation. She was greeted at the airport by her aunt and her cousin, who was just 2 years younger than her. Meng settled in New South Wales, Australia's most populous state, where 1/3 of the nation's population resides. It was here that she began the early chapters of her new life. After arriving in Australia, Meng settled into a comfortable life with her 48-year-old aunt, her aunt's younger husband, Derek Barrett, and her cousin, all living together in a modest camping house. Meng had her own private room, where she spent most of her spare time. She was passionate about reading and drawing, often immersing herself in these hobbies for hours on end. To better adapt to life in a new country, Meng adopted the name Michelle. As Michelle Lang, she enrolled at the University of Technology, Sydney, where she excelled in her studies in economics and hospitality management. Michelle was a bright and driven young woman. She embraced new experiences and had a natural talent for making friends. Like many people her age, she frequently shared photos on social media. Images of her enjoying cocktails with friends and snapshots from her adventurous outings to risky, thrilling locations. Michelle had a bold, curious spirit and wasn't one to shy away from travel, whether it was a getaway to Hobart or spontaneous day trips around New South Wales. In recent weeks, she had posted videos from West Head Lookout near Sydney Harbour, pictures from Resolute Beach to the north, Ku-ring-gai Chase National Park, and even from Varee Beach along the south coast. On June 13, 2013, she visited Snapper Point and fearlessly took a photo of herself standing at the edge of a cliff, a striking image she later shared on Instagram, one that would later seem hauntingly prophetic. Michelle thrived in her new environment. She performed well academically, formed new friendships, and secured a part-time job. Eager to build a personal life as well, she actively used dating websites and went on casual dates. Her days were full. She attended university classes, worked in the evenings, and spent her weekends socializing or exploring interesting places. On April 21, 2016, she met a friend at a shopping mall. They had lunch together and did some shopping before Michelle boarded a train. She disembarked at Campsie Station around 4:30 p.m. and then vanished without a trace. 2 days later, Derek went to the station to pick up his wife, who was returning from a business trip. Michelle's aunt asked Derek about her niece, but he said he hadn't seen her in 2 days. At the time, Derek Barrett was unemployed and often stayed up late using the computer, typically waking only in the afternoon. So it was obvious that he might not have seen Michelle. But the situation was such that nobody had seen Michelle since April 22nd, and her phone was switched off. Having called all Michelle's acquaintances and friends, the aunt became even more worried. She inspected the girl's room, but it was in complete order as always. After looking through the girl's laptop, the family concluded that Michelle had not returned from her date, and perhaps something had happened to her. Michelle's absence was quite unusual, as she was in daily contact with friends and family members living in China and Australia. The next day, Michelle's aunt and her husband, Derek, went to the police station and filed a missing persons report. They also reported Michelle Lung's disappearance to the Chinese embassy. On April 24, 2016, the body of an unidentified woman wrapped in a plastic bag was found by a group of tourists at Snapper Point. As Michelle's relatives in China and Australia searched for her, local news channels carried a report of the woman's body being found. A compiled sketch of the victim aired left no doubt. Michelle had been found. It took the police 3 days to identify her after they made a sketch of her. From that point on, Michelle Lang was officially listed as a missing person. An investigation was launched. After interviewing close relatives living with Michelle, the first theory was that Michelle had been attacked by an unknown guy who Michelle had planned to meet that day. On CCTV cameras restored the movements of the girl on the day of disappearance. But on surveillance cameras and on a short train journey, Michelle was alone. According to her friends, she had no plans to meet anyone that day and was in a hurry to get home. Reviewing social networks and correspondence of the girl did not confirm the presence of a young man with whom she could meet. The version about a secret stranger who could have committed the crime was not confirmed. The results of forensic examination were expected. The autopsy confirmed that Michelle's body had multiple injuries. She had most likely tried to fight off her attacker and suffered multiple stab wounds. Police Chief Inspector Gary Jubelin said the interpretation of the situation is that Michelle was brutally assaulted before her death, but she was spotted on her way home and did not go out anywhere else. So who could have attacked her with such atrocity? The inspector also noted that most likely the perpetrator had deliberately chosen a very lonely area of such a beautiful place. After all, the body was found in an area frequented by tourists and fishermen, but the place was somewhat isolated. Forensics found that Michelle Lung's body had been in the water for no more than 48 hours, and more likely much less, meaning that the body had been dumped quite recently. The chief inspector of police said that although the location where the body was found was far from the entrance to the national park, there was a parking lot near the tourist attraction, and so it was possible that the body had been taken there by car. Homicide detectives studied CCTV and traffic cameras to determine Michelle Lang's last movements. They continued to contact her family members, friends, and co-workers for additional information. Also, in addition to the search efforts, interviews continued with relatives and acquaintances in the hope of reconstructing a picture of the event and establishing the full picture of relationships in the family where Michelle lived. Police Inspector Gary Jubilant said with certainty that from all the information that has been collected about Michelle, she was very responsible, always stayed in touch with her family, informing them where she was going. So there were serious fears that there was trouble when she disappeared. However, for 2 days, none of the family noticed the girl was missing or simply didn't want to notice. Police called Derek Barrett in for questioning as the last person to see Michelle alive. Investigators were skeptical of his accounts of nightlife and long daytime naps, so he was re-interviewed. The investigators began asking questions about his relationship with Michelle and asked him to remember the last time he had seen her. Unable to withstand the pressure of the interrogation, Derek refused to answer the questions and demanded a lawyer. Such strange and uncertain behavior led to a number of doubts, and Derek was arrested as a suspect. However, the arrest had grounds. On the eve of the interrogation, investigators checked his cell phone signal and found that he was in the same area where Michelle's body was found on April 24th. When police obtained surveillance footage from a parking lot that captured a car matching the description of Derek Barrett's vehicle in the early morning hours of April 24th, there was no doubt that he was there. Derek denied and claimed to the last that it was just a coincidence and the car was not his, but the footage was clear enough to prove his presence in the parking lot. Police have charged a man in the death of 25-year-old Michelle Lang, whose naked body with multiple stab wounds was found in a blowhole on the central NSW coast. A 27-year-old man has been arrested and charged with murder. The news of the arrest and charge against Derek has left Michelle's entire family in shock. Police spoke to Michelle's mother, who was devastated by the news of her daughter's death. She rushed to Sydney to see the very scene of her only daughter's dream and death. The woman was still unable to comprehend her death. Derek Barrett, 27, married to Michelle Lang's aunt, was charged with the 25-year-old student's murder after police released CCTV footage capturing her last shopping trip in Sydney's Central Business District on April 21st and her drive home. The footage shows her shopping at a Pitt Street mall before boarding a train at St. James Station for a ride to Campsie in Sydney's southwest. Police believe Michelle returned to her family home in Campsie in the afternoon, where she lived with her uncle, aunt, and cousin. She is presumed to have been murdered in her home. Recall that the autopsy revealed that Michelle tried to fight off her attacker and was stabbed several times in defense, stabbing her more than 30 times in total. CCTV footage is believed to have captured a vehicle entering Lake Momoric National Park at around 7 a.m. on April 24th. Police claim Michelle Lang's body was inside the vehicle. Despite Derek Barrett being detained and charged, the investigation continued. Gradually, other details of Michelle Lang's final minutes of life surfaced. Based on these, further charges were laid, including 5 counts of indecent assault, 2 counts of installing a filming device, and murder. The investigation revealed that the suspect had an unhealthy sexual interest in his wife's young niece. When Derek Barrett's cell phone was seized and handed over to specialists to analyze and recover previously deleted data, the files found on the phone left no doubt that he was not only involved in Michelle's death, but had an unhealthy interest in her. It transpired that Derek had set up a hidden camera in the shared bathroom hidden behind toiletries and regularly reviewed the footage. The phone also contained images taken just before Michelle's death. Following these images, it was apparent that Michelle had returned home on April 21st around 5 p.m. and around midnight. She sent her last text message from her phone and had not been heard from since. Deep into the night, Derek Barrett began to put his devious plan into action. He entered Michelle's room again when she was asleep to perform the now customary shoot and satisfaction. But the girl woke up and Derek attacked her. He tied her up and put duct tape over her mouth to keep her quiet. The pervert kept her tied to the bed for 2 days and periodically abused her. In photos on his phone, investigators saw Michelle bound and naked, lying on the bed with a look of horror on her face. However, in these photos, Michelle did not yet have the injuries from which she died. Derek's last picture was taken around 8 a.m. on April 23rd, and at that time, Michelle was alive. During the day of April 23rd, Derek's stepson Derek came home twice and did not hear Michelle's quiet moans. Derek was taking a shower at the time. Surveillance cameras determined that Derek left the apartment 4 times to take out the trash. Presumably by this time, Michelle was already dead, and Derek, having showered and washed off traces of blood, thoroughly cleaned the house, hiding traces of the crime and Michelle's disappearance. On April 24th at 7 a.m., Derek drove to Snapper Point. On his way, he stopped at a gas station where he bought drinks and filled his car with gasoline. That's where he was caught on CCTV cameras. Upon arriving at Snapper Point, he disposed of Michelle's body and took some pictures around 9 a.m. Afterwards, Derek visited his parents, who noticed nothing unusual in his behavior, and then returned home to await his wife's return. With absolute equanimity, he reported several times that he had not seen Michelle, that the girl had not returned home, and cynically accompanied his wife to the police station to file a missing persons report. On June 29, 2016, the first court hearing was held. Barrett's lawyer, Bill Whitby, told Burwood local court that Barrett was pleading not guilty, and he was as shocked and upset by Michelle's death as the rest of the family. Michelle Lung's friends and family were in the packed courtroom, but Derek Barrett did not need to be present. He appeared later via video link. The fact is that the day before, the defendant reported that he didn't remember much in the hours before he killed Michelle Lang because he had taken illegal drugs the day before. He also told the court that he had only vague memories of the 2-hour trip to Snapper Point, where he threw Michelle Lung's body off the cliff. On this basis, before attending the court hearing, Derek Barrett was examined by a psychologist. However, forensic psychologist Dr. Richard First disputed the defendant's claims of memory loss. He testified and found Derek Barrett mentally fit to be punished to the full extent of his sentence. Dr. First testified that the drugs the suspect was taking did not cause memory loss. The doctor claimed that all of his actions were clear and purposeful, from the murder to the disposal of the body. Respected forensic psychiatrist Dr. Richard First also stated that Derek Barrett's IQ, concentration, and memory were within normal limits. He also did not believe Barrett's claims of memory loss, and said the number of stab wounds indicated sadistic tendencies rather than memory lapses and acting on emotions. The psychologist also rejected Derek Barrett's claim that he did not feel sexually attracted to the victim. He bound, gagged, and stabbed the girl 30 times, but Derek Barrett claimed he had no memory of this. Dr. Richard First also told the court that the accused faked amnesia to mitigate his responsibility for the crime, after he claimed he could not remember the period when he apprehended and killed Michelle Lang. Speaking at the trial, Derek Barrett tried to explain his crime by claiming that he was addicted to illegal drugs. However, this fact was also challenged by the doctor. Richard First pointed out that Derek's claim was self-defeating because it was obvious that the suspect had gained weight during that time period. Judge Wilson said that in his 30 years as a criminal defense attorney, he had never seen an obese, substance-dependent person. But unfortunately, there was nothing sincere about Derek Barrett's behavior in the courtroom in Sydney. Derek Barrett's behavior in court gave the impression of a psychopath. His crime was not the result of a drunken night out, some poor life choices, or childhood abuse. In August, at a retrial hearing, Derek Barrett pleaded guilty to murdering and kidnapping Michelle Lang, as well as twice sneaking into her room while she slept and making videos. He also admitted taking 19 explicit photos of Michelle Lang shortly before her death. Barrett said he could not remember the 48-hour period during which he killed the girl, including cleaning up the crime scene and dumping her body, because he was under the influence of illegal substances. He said his only memories were of an argument, blood in the bathroom, and the terrified face of his niece screaming at him. However, Judge Wilson said she did not believe Derek Barrett was telling the truth about his memory loss, nor did she believe he was truly sorry for what he had done. The Lang family consoled each other while Derek Barrett wiped away tears, telling them, "I deserve to live. This should never have happened." Passing sentence, Judge Helen Wilson went even further. She said it was a depraved and sadistic act committed by a person in a position of trust with Mrs. Lang. As the judge detailed Derek Barrett's fantasies and actions in front of a packed courtroom, he stared at the floor. He was no longer enjoying the attention, and it was abundantly clear that he had failed to fool anyone. Obviously, the events that had occurred must be seared into his brain, but the killer claimed they were nothing more than flashes in his memory, because he had taken drugs a day or two before. He never flinched once in the court sessions, repeating his victim's name over and over again. Speaking to the court, Chief Inspector Gary Jubilin of the NSW Police Homicide Unit said the crime was horrific and senseless. From an investigative point of view, it's nice that we got justice, but there's no joy in a case like this, he said. Judge Helen Wilson sentenced 28-year-old Derek Barrett to 34 years and 6 months in prison for his crime, with a maximum term of 46 years. He will be eligible for parole in February 1950. Merritt showed no emotion when he was sentenced. Michelle's mother, Mrs. Jiang, thanked the Australian and Chinese communities for their support at a time when she is suffering greatly. She also thanked the NSW police, including Detective Inspector Gary Jubilant of the Homicide Squad, for investigating her daughter's death. A fund has been set up to pay for Miss Lung's funeral and to support her mother when she returns to China. But Michelle Lung's sad story did not end there. For years after the crime, inexplicable events occurred in one family. A woman often visited her elderly mother, and on one of these visits, she found her sitting in a chair in the kitchen with an unknown USB device in her hands. When the daughter plugged the USB drive into her computer, she saw that it contained graphic videos and photos of obscene content and contacted the police. The thumb drive contained 9 video files that lasted more than an hour and 13 files, with photos of Michelle Lang being abused shortly before she was murdered on April 23, 2016. The woman had no discernible connection to Derek Barrett, lived about 4 miles from his former home in Campsie, and it is not known where the USB drive came from or how it came into her family home. Police were able to match the photos to those that Derek Barrett deleted from his phone before his arrest in an attempt to hide his crimes from police. In 2020, Derek Barrett was formally charged with multiple sexual offenses after videos of him abusing Michelle Lang were discovered on a USB drive in November 2019. However, both police and prosecutors acknowledged they were at a loss to explain how the device came to light. Prosecutor Hugh Baker told the court that the USB drive was somehow found by an elderly woman with dementia who was largely confined to her home and only occasionally ventured into the yard. The location of the discovery, a house in Strathfield, remains a mystery, with no clear explanation of how the device ended up there. Nevertheless, the newly uncovered evidence revealed the full extent of Barrett's abuse of Michelle prior to her murder. As a result, his sentence was extended, and he was denied the possibility of parole. This horrifying and depraved secret, uncovered purely by chance when a USB drive ended up in the hands of an elderly woman in a quiet Sydney suburb, led to Derek Barrett receiving a well-deserved extension to his already substantial prison sentence. Friends and acquaintances paid tribute to Michelle Lung across both Chinese and Australian social media platforms. Every tragedy invites reflection, prompting us to examine its parts in hopes of understanding whether, by altering the sequence of events, such acts of cruelty, fear, and violence can be prevented. In this case, it is clear that Derek Barrett, an unemployed man in the prime of his physical life, spent his days and nights idly at a computer. With no purpose or discipline, he allowed darkness to fester within him, until evil finally took control. Perhaps if Derek had been employed, he might not have had the energy or opportunity to give in to his twisted desires. But in this tragic story, a combination of Derek's idleness, Michelle's aunt's compassion, and her cousin's detachment created the conditions for a horrifying betrayal, one that subjected Michelle to 2 days of unimaginable fear, suffering, and violation. Dear friends, value your life and the lives of those around you, for none of us can know which day might be our last. Moving on to the next case. Nathan and Crystal Maddox. Sometimes, exes return, but the true danger lies not in their reappearance, but in the possibility that they come back armed. On January 18, 2014, a young couple exited a church hand in hand. It was a joyful day they had long awaited. Inside, the congregation remained, unaware of the horror about to unfold. The couple made their way to their parked car, intending to retrieve boxes of toys and gifts for their young daughter, who was still inside the church. But the quiet calm of a January afternoon was suddenly shattered by gunfire. One shot, then another, and another. The pair collapsed instantly, as if life had been switched off like spent batteries. Blood quickly spread across the pavement, turning the joyful scene into one of tragedy. Just minutes later, emergency services received a report of a double homicide in a church parking lot. As the sound of gunfire faded, people rushed outside, their faces etched with confusion and fear. Panic spread through the gathering crowd, while a small girl, who had been waiting for her gifts, cried uncontrollably, overwhelmed by the chaos. Though she had heard the gunshots like many others, she had been spared the sight of the tragedy. Police quickly secured the scene with tape and began a preliminary investigation. When paramedics arrived, there was nothing they could do. The two victims were already dead. They were identified as Nathan and Crystal Maddox, a young married couple. Now, we'll go back to the beginning, revisiting the lives of these two individuals and carefully exploring the circumstances that led to this devastating moment. We must also take the time to consider whether this heartbreaking outcome could have been prevented. When a person's mind becomes clouded by lies, betrayal, greed, fear, and darkness, they may descend into actions so vile that even their loved ones would struggle to comprehend them. In such cases, it's not uncommon for entire families to become entangled in the chaos, leading to the collapse of many lives. The story you're about to follow centers on the cold-blooded double murder of Nathan and Crystal Maddox. If you're ready to uncover every intricate detail of this chilling case, then let's begin. Our journey takes us to the state of Texas, specifically to the tiny town of Colmasneal in Tyler County. With a population of just 563, it's the kind of place where everyone knows everyone else by name, or at least by face. In a town this close-knit, relationships often grow quickly, and it wasn't long before Nathan and Kristen's romance moved at a breakneck pace. The young couple had grown up on nearby streets, sharing the innocence of first love and their very first kiss. However, Kristen's parents disapproved of Nathan and did everything in their power to keep the two apart. Out of respect and loyalty to her parents, Kristen chose to end the relationship. But life had an unexpected twist. Kristen soon discovered she was pregnant. With few options left, and not wanting their daughter to face public judgment as a single mother, her parents reluctantly agreed to the marriage. Nathan and Kristen were wed in Texas, and not long after, they moved into their own home and welcomed their daughter, Madison. However, married life proved to be more challenging than romantic. Nathan found himself under pressure to financially support his growing family. The cost of owning and maintaining a home quickly added up, forcing Nathan to accept work far from home, which required him to travel to Montana. As a young husband and father, Nathan did his best to visit Kristen and Madison whenever he could. He regularly sent money home and believed he was building a stable, happy life for his family. In his mind, everything was as it should be. He loved Kristen, adored Madison, and thought they shared a perfect little family. That belief held strong, until the day he returned home from Montana. The moment he stepped inside, he knew something was wrong. The house was nearly empty. Most of the belongings were gone. On the kitchen table lay a note. In a few cold lines, Kristen informed him that she was leaving. The reason she gave was unsettling. She claimed she no longer knew where her husband was, who he was with, or when he would return. Kristen claimed in her note that she was unhappy, but that statement was far from the truth. She was fully aware that Nathan was working in Montana to support their family. He called regularly to check on her and Madison, constantly asking about their well-being. He also sent money consistently. What hurt Nathan most was that she took Madison with her, and worse still, he was now forbidden from seeing his own daughter. Kristen's actions were deeply cruel. She went to the police and, using false claims, secured full custody of Madison. She accused Nathan of neglect and disinterest, despite knowing he had been actively involved and supportive. Nathan eventually learned that Kristen and Madison had moved back in with her parents. He made several attempts to visit his daughter, but the Westfall family refused to let him. They seemed pleased to have finally pushed away a son-in-law they had never approved of. As time went on, Nathan made the decision to move back to his hometown, hoping to be closer to Madison. He didn't stop trying to see her, but he realized that if he wanted real and consistent contact, he would need to fight for custody through the legal system. With the help of a lawyer, he began the difficult process of securing visitation rights. During this challenging chapter of his life, Nathan reconnected with Crystal, a familiar face from his past. The two had known each other since childhood, having gone to school together. Their lives had taken different paths during their teenage years. Crystal had moved to the city with dreams of earning a university degree, but just before graduating, she ended up getting married. Instead of pursuing the successful career she had once envisioned, Crystal found fulfillment in family life, raising 4 children. However, over time, her marriage began to unravel, and eventually, she and her husband divorced. In 2011, Crystal returned to her hometown with her children. It was during this period that she and Nathan reconnected, 2 longtime friends brought back together when they each needed support the most. Nathan quickly grew fond of Crystal's children. He admired the way she engaged with them. Her boundless energy and warm, optimistic spirit lit up every room, like a fairy spreading joy. In 2013, Nathan and Crystal tied the knot. Nathan began working at the Lakin Industries warehouse, while Crystal launched a small business, opening a boutique that sold children's clothing under her own name, along with handmade jewelry. The business flourished, and their financial stability allowed them to hire a skilled attorney to help Nathan pursue legal rights to see his daughter, Madison. Fortunately, Madison took an instant liking to Crystal and was delighted to have a loving stepmother and new siblings in her life. The girl was completely happy in her father's home. This made Lita and Paula Westfall, Kristen's parents, completely resentful. They were very afraid of losing their only granddaughter. Back in 2012, Kristen Westfall, with the support of her parents, applied to the court for full custody of her daughter. The custody battle dragged on for a long 2 years. The Westfall family had hoped to get full custody very quickly, but Crystal's arrival in Nathan's life changed the whole picture of his existence. A full family, a home, and a good job made a strong case in court, and Nathan was granted visitation rights with his daughter. He was very happy and prepared to take his daughter away for the day. In October 2013, the judge allowed Nathan and Crystal to have supervised visits with Madison. On January 18, 2014, Nathan and Crystal arrived at Mount Carmel Church for Sunday service, after which they wanted to go for a walk with 6-year-old Maddie. They left the church a little earlier than the rest of the congregation to retrieve pre-prepared gifts for Madison from their car. Just a few steps later, 3 loud pops were heard. Nathan and Crystal were killed by fatal gunshot wounds to the head. The small town was shocked by the gratuitous execution of a young married couple. But as it later turned out, there was a reason after all. But why take 2 people's lives so brazenly and so brutally? The police arrived on the scene and meticulously investigated the scene. Nathan and Crystal had been shot in the head with a .30 caliber rifle, which was found at the scene along with .30 caliber shell casings. An autopsy later revealed that Nathan had also been shot in the thigh with a 20-gauge shotgun, leading investigators to assume that there were 2 shooters, as it is obvious that one person cannot shoot and reload at the same time. Investigators conducted a series of interviews with witnesses to gather information about the Maddox family and build their picture of what happened. They interviewed parishioners, acquaintances, and relatives of the slain family. But what surprised them most was the reaction of Nathan's ex-wife's family. Kristen and her parents were called to testify at the police station, as were the other witnesses. The further behavior of this family caused great surprise to the investigators. The Westfalls played up the tragedy too much, trying to hide their joy at the deaths that had occurred. Paul Westfall was so shocked that he went into a seizure, so much so that he couldn't believe the news of Nathan's death that he had to call emergency services. A grown man who had spent years trying to rid himself of Nathan's presence in his daughter's life was so upset that he had a seizure. Kristen was the first person interviewed, and her interview was a little creepy. She was the only one of the family to maintain a very calm and natural demeanor despite the fact that she and Nathan had been together for a long time and had a child together. Kristen continued to give some really weird details about him, trying to bring out only the negative aspects of her ex-husband. She reported that she knew who killed him. In Montana, Nathan was listed in dangerous motorcycle gangs. One day, one of the gang members showed up at Nathan's mother's house and threatened to kill him. This story checked out, but it remained an empty threat because of an accidentally broken motorcycle. And the gang itself turned out to be a common exaggeration to confuse the investigation. Also, as an alibi, Kristen said that on the day of the crime, she was at the grocery store with her father, Paul, a couple miles from the church, after which they both went home. Surveillance footage at 10:57 a.m. confirmed their presence at the grocery store. Paul Westfall told the exact same story, but Paul was a hunter and had a firearm in his arsenal. So his hands were tested for traces of gunpowder, but the result was negative. But until now, his reaction to the death of Nathan, whom he sincerely hated and never hid it, seemed to the investigators very strange and played. It left a sliver of doubt in his sincerity. Interviews with loved ones over a short period of time helped investigators discover that Nathan Maddox was involved in a custody battle over his daughter with his ex-wife, Kristen Westphal, and her family. After a long and bitter dispute in court, he was close to retaining custody, something that none of the Westphal family members strongly wanted. Such a desperate battle between the parties may well have been cause for reprisal. But the police had no concrete evidence to arrest any member of the Westphal family. The family consisted of 4 people, and 2 people were the shooters. Investigators had yet to be convinced of their story and figure out which family member pulled the trigger, taking the lives of 2 people, or whether a hired killer did it. The investigators took a different path and decided to act through the main protagonist of the controversy, little Madison Maddox. After all, her safety was at stake. She continued to be with a family that could pose a threat to her. Police officers, along with Child Protective Services, CPS, came to remove the girl from the home, but faced a wave of protest and rage. The behavior of the older Westphal family entailed a search of the home. What the police later found in the house shocked them. A gun was stored on a shelf in an easily accessible place in the room. The culmination of the search was the illegal drugs scattered around the house. It turns out that in 2013, Kristen Westphal was charged and arrested for possession of a controlled substance. The arrests were repeated, which clearly indicated that Kristen couldn't be a good mother to Madison. When Kristen went to jail in early 2013, her parents were granted temporary custody of their daughter and would not allow Nathan to see her while their granddaughter was in their custody. However, despite Child Protective Services prohibitions, Kristen continued to live in the house with her young daughter in the same room and slept in the same bed with her. Even in 2014, with the injunctions in place, Kristen continued to live with the rest of her family and had daily access to her daughter, despite being ordered by the court to move. After a search of the Westphals' home, where a used syringe with residue of illegal substances was found on a dresser and a gun on the nightstand next to Kristen's bed, little Madison was taken into temporary custody, and additional evidence found led to the Westphals' arrest. State authorities wanted the girl placed in foster care and said they found supplies for illegal drugs in the Westphals' home, as well as a gun on a nightstand within easy reach of the girl. Child Protective Services was involved in the Madison Maddox custody case. In March 2014, less than 2 months after the tragic murder outside the church, authorities made 4 arrests. Kristen Westphal, 29, her younger brother Cameron, and her parents Paul and Lita Westphal were arrested. There was no direct evidence of their guilt in the Maddox murder. Cross-examinations didn't produce the desired result either. So the police had to go for a little trickery to put the squeeze on the most vulnerable member of the Westphal family. That was 18-year-old Cameron. He was told that if proven guilty, all members of his family would face life imprisonment, and the direct killers would face the death penalty. Cameron was young and kind-hearted. He was very scared and quickly agreed to cooperate with the investigation, revealing all the details of what happened. The crime against the young couple, Maddox, turned out to be carefully pre-planned by the family gang in order to permanently exclude Nathan from the role of father. Shortly after the shooting episode, it was revealed that Nathan and his ex-wife Kristen, with the help of her family, had been secured a nasty custody disagreement over their 5-year-old daughter, Madison. The long and costly legal battle was to end well for Nathan. The Westphals were concerned and carefully plotted a scheme to remove him from Madison's life. Nathan wanted to take care of his daughter alone, but the Westphals were not interested in letting her go even to see her father, let alone give him the girl permanently. The Westphals were very hurt by the fact that the former son-in-law had settled down in life and was living a good life. Thus, when the judge allowed him multiple visitations, it became obvious that he could win the trial, which led to Kristen coming up with an original idea to get rid of him once and for all. At first, Kristen tried to find someone to kill her ex-husband. When that failed, she and her father decided to do it themselves. On Sunday afternoon, the family often attended church, and the day of January 18th was no exception. Lita Westphal and little Madison drove to the appointed time for the service. Afterwards, she had to hand the girl over to her father. In the meantime, Kristen and Paul went to a distant store and posed as customers to get on CCTV cameras to create a solid alibi. But they miscalculated the timing. Each family member had their own responsible role to play. For the entire interval, they communicated by text message, updating each other on the Maddox's movements. Letha, who had attended the service, informed Paul as Nathan and Crystal prepared to leave the church. She also called 911 immediately after the murder. Cameron took an active role in concealing the evidence. He discarded the gun used after his sister and father shot the newlyweds in the head near a remote church. He drove to a lake where he discarded the bag of weapons. Cameron soon agreed to cooperate with authorities and revealed that Kristen originally came up with the idea, and the family went along. He also pointed out to investigators the location where he had discarded the murder weapons. Divers later retrieved said items, which confirmed Cameron's words. The police detained 29-year-old Kristen, her brother Cameron, and her parents, Paul and Letha Westfall, and charged them with organized crime. Thus, Kristen and Paul pulled the trigger, with Cameron and Lita acting as willing accomplices. Given that Lita was at the church at the time of the incident, it was obvious that she was not responsible for the shots that killed Nathan and Crystal Maddox. However, phone records showed that she was responsible for informing her daughter and spouse of the couple's whereabouts, and that she informed them as they left the church. While Kristen and Paul were the ones who fired the bullets, Lita and her son Cameron participated in the crime intentionally. The trial was very loud and lengthy. Each member of the Westfall family was tried separately. Paul Westfall continued to act out his seizures, so he was found mentally unfit and remained in a state psychiatric hospital for a while for evaluation. In May 2014, a judge found Paul incompetent, but that verdict was overturned 4 months later. With Paul and Letha facing the death penalty for the murders of Nathan and Crystal Maddox, they had little choice but to agree to a mutually beneficial plea bargain with the DA's office. To avoid the death penalty, Paul was forced to take a plea bargain with the prosecution. He pleaded guilty to the charges, and thus was sentenced to life in prison without parole. Lita also took a plea bargain with the investigation. Instead of going to trial, she pleaded guilty to participating in organized criminal activity. Lita will not be eligible for parole until 2046. She is currently incarcerated at Mountain View Prison in Gatesville, but will be eligible for parole in 2044. At the time of sentencing, Lita Westfall was 54 years old, so she will likely die in prison. Kristen is the third member of the Westfall family to stand trial in this case. Throughout the entire court hearing, Kristen pleaded not guilty. To all the accusations against her, she replied that her whole family was crazy. She was the only one who was sincere about it. When her entire family, Letha, Paul, and Cameron, came to the trial and testified against her, she couldn't say anything to their faces. In August 2016, the final trial and sentencing for Kristen Westfall began. The motive for killing Nathan and Crystal Maddox was custody of Madison Maddox. Kristen adamantly did not want Nathan to see Maddie whenever he wanted. She did not want to give him the privilege because she could not see him happy. She wanted to control her daughter and father's communication herself. And through the child, she wanted to control everything he did and everything he felt. The trial took over a week. In the end, with overwhelming evidence against her, it took the jury 8 hours to find her guilty of capital murder. In a Brazos County courtroom, attorneys and the judge considered final motions for the woman. Kristen was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole nearly 9 months before her father pleaded guilty and received an identical sentence in May 2017. Kristen Westfall is currently incarcerated at the William Hobby Women's Prison in Falls County, Texas. While Paul, Lita, and Kristen Westfall were ultimately charged with 2 counts of murder, officials only charged the youngest member of the family, Cameron, with 2 counts of tampering with or fabricating physical evidence. Cameron Westfall pleaded guilty to 2 counts of third-degree tampering with evidence. The judge deferred sentencing contingent upon Cameron Westfall testifying against his family. He faced up to 10 years in prison on each charge. It was reported that he had nothing to do with the actual shooting, and that his mother was also not involved because she was at the church when the crime occurred. However, phone records show that she texted her husband and daughter as the Maddoxes were preparing to go home. Currently, Cameron is incarcerated at the Huntsville Correctional Facility in Huntsville, Texas, where he is expected to remain until his expected release date in 2025. Cameron was very indifferent to the crime, and he really had nothing to do with the crime. As he claims, Paul allegedly just happened to come home, handed Cameron 2 guns, and told him to throw them away. But the investigation didn't rule out that Cameron knew a little more than he was saying. After all, Cameron lived in the house with his family, and he simply couldn't have not heard about Kristen and Paul's plans to kill the Maddox family. And if he was an unspoken witness to the plot after all, why didn't he go to the police or even try to stop his family? So ended the story of a double murder at the house of God in a close-knit community that shook the entire state of Texas to its core. Recall that on January 18, 2014, Nathan and Crystal Maddox were shot and killed right outside the gates of Mount Carmel Baptist Church near Combs Neal. After waiting for a legal and supervised visitation with his 5-year-old daughter from a previous marriage, it soon became clear that the girl's biological mother, Kristen Westfall, and her entire family, brother Cameron and parents Lloyd Paul and Lita Westfall, were behind the crime. This case was complicated. The community demanded justice. Lloyd Paul, Lita, and Cameron Westfall made a deal with the investigation. After agreeing to testify against his sister, Cameron took a plea bargain. He pleaded guilty to a lesser charge, 2 counts of tampering with or fabricating physical evidence. In 2016, a judge sentenced Cameron to 10 years in prison and his mother received a life sentence. The following year, a judge sentenced Lloyd Paul to life in prison. He avoided the death penalty by pleading guilty to first-degree murder. Under the plea agreement, he would not be able to appeal the sentence. The crime family's protagonist, Kristen Westfall, received a life sentence without parole. In a fateful decision by her mother, Madison Maddox lost her father and will likely never see the grandparents who cared for her and perhaps even loved her. Time after the Westfall family was sentenced, the legal battle for custody of Madison Maddox continues. Nathan Maddox's father, Jim, has since filed a petition to become the primary guardian of his granddaughter. A huge number of people die in custody battles every year. What's most heartbreaking is that the children were not given better lives. They were left as orphans, carrying emotional wounds that may never fully heal. In a town known for its religious devotion, where church was a central part of life, it's shocking how easily such violence could unfold. Under the guise of protecting Madison, the older members of the Westfall family carried out their daughter's wishes and played a part in this horrific act. But what did they truly hope to achieve? From everything we've seen, Nathan was not a cruel or harmful person. He didn't deserve what was done to him. Nathan deeply loved his daughter and genuinely tried to be a devoted father. It's clear that beyond the custody battle, much of the resentment stemmed from the fact that he had moved on, building a new life, free from conflict and crime, and finding true happiness with Crystal. He had achieved a stable, loving relationship, something he lacked with Kristen. This seemed to fuel her bitterness, which she managed to spread throughout her entire family, turning them against him. If this were only about custody, they wouldn't have gone so far as to murder Nathan's new wife. That alone speaks volumes. The custody battle over Madison had actually begun before Nathan and Crystal became a couple. In truth, there's only one true victim in the entire conflict between the Westfall and Maddox families, and that's Madison. One can only hope that as she grows older, she won't be burdened by the selfishness and manipulation of the adults who claim to love her. Because if they truly cared about her well-being, they would have put their pride aside and worked toward a peaceful resolution for her sake. Instead, they acted out of ego, not love. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed exploring these intriguing cold cases with me. If you found the video fascinating, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to Cold Case Mystique for more deep dives into cold case investigations. Your support helps me bring you more compelling content. Leave a comment below with your thoughts or any cases you'd like me to cover next. See you in the next video, and remember, the search for truth never stops.